influencing popular culture, politics, and everything in between. The local station takes you ringside as we discuss the crazy world that is professional wrestling. This is Going Ringside with the local station.
Hello, wrestling fans, and thank you for joining us today for episode 15 of Going Ringside, where we're going to talk to Hacksaw Jim Duggan a little later. Very excited about that. But first, let's kind of talk about what's going on in Jacksonville right now, and that is River City Wrestling Con. We previewed it on the last episode. You can watch right now wherever you get your podcasts, episode 14. A lot of big names like Duggan and others coming to the Jacksonville Fairgrounds June 10th and 11th. And we had a sweepstakes for some free tickets, and I want to announce our winners right now to go down to the fairgrounds and see other legends like Brian Danielson, Kurt Angle, Saraya, used to be Paige, Rob Van Dam, just a lot of legends and current superstars going to be at the fairgrounds June 10th and 11th. So we had a sweepstakes here at News4Jax to give out 2 sets of free tickets, and I want to read to you those winners right now. Winner number 1. Out of St. John's, Florida, that would be Gordon Goodyear. Congratulations, Gordon. We will be getting in touch with you about your tickets. And the other winner out of Middleburg, Florida is Adrian Olivas, O-L-I-V-A-S. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Adrian Olivas out of Middleburg. Congratulations to you both. Thanks for participating in our sweepstakes. Come out and see us at the event June 10th and 11th. It's the first time we're going to take Going Ringside on the road. We'll be down at the Jacksonville Fairgrounds June 10th and 11th. In fact, June 10th, that's a Saturday, we will be doing our first live podcast at all the News4Jax platforms, news4jax.com, News4Jax Plus, and our News4Jax YouTube channel. If you're not familiar with our website, if you're from out of the area, it's NEWS, the number 4, JAX.com. You'll enjoy it no matter where you live. Give us a tune in. Our live podcast is going live from River City Wrestling Con with legends from all across the globe. Saturday, June the 10th at 4 p.m. We'll be live. Don't miss it. It'll be a lot of fun. So, and if you do go out to River City Wrestling Con anytime in the weekend, if you're in the Jacksonville area, come see us, come say hi. We'd love to meet with the fans and let us know what you think of the podcast that we've been bringing out here. And before we get to Hacksaw Jim Duggan in a bit, because he's the topic of today's episode and he will be at River City Wrestling Con, I do want to give a shout out to Conan, K-Dog, reaching out to me on Twitter, asking me about the show. Of course, Conan, along with Disco Inferno, 2 legendary wrestlers, particularly really well known nationally from their time in WCW. Conan has shown up on AEW recently. They do Keeping It 100 with Conan and Disco on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, at Patreon, you can find them. So was so excited to hear from them and give their show a listen. It is a great show. They've got a great perspective on everything really going on day to day. If you like wrestling podcasts like this one, you love Keeping It 100 with Conan and Disco. So thanks, guys, for reaching out. We really appreciate it. So today I want to talk about the subject of today's episode. That would be, USA, USA, that's all you need to know. Some of his biggest feuds ever, Nikolai Volkov, Iron Sheik, JYD in his younger years, that would be Hacksaw Jim Duggan. A guy who will tell you that he had a very one-dimensional gimmick, but it has worked and it has kept him popular for 40 years. Hacksaw, we sat down with and talked to. He's been going through a lot in the last few years. He had some health scares he talked about, but is still doing well. He's one of those success stories in wrestling on the personal level. You hear so much about wrestlers who have had drug or alcohol issues. Hacksaw's been pretty well. He's been married to the same woman for 40 years and just loving life. And he's got a great outlook on life. And Hacksaw even made the news, national news, all over the place. About 6 months ago, right before Christmas, and we're going to get to that in the podcast, when he held down an intruder with a .44 Magnum pistol in his home. We're going to talk about that in a little bit in the podcast. So Hacksaw is a great guy, and we were so excited to get him on the show just to talk about his life in wrestling and just his perspective on things. And he gave me an interesting perspective. So when you think of wrestlers, you may think, Well, they're popular, but they're not as popular, most of them, as like those NFL or NBA athletes. But he made the good analogy for me about like Tom Brady, the biggest of the NFL stars. Could Tom Brady walk in the street in Australia and have people start yelling his name? Probably not, but Hacksaw Jim Duggan could. Could he do that in Japan? Duggan would be noticed in Japan, South America. Unlike these American sports or NBA or NFL, you may have a few guys who are really, really famous, but all these wrestlers are known in the U.S., but globally. He said it's really been a unique life for him for 40 years to be in this industry that just has global penetration to fan bases on all the various continents. He's wrestled all over the world with some of the biggest names of all time: Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, Savage, just all the greats. He talks to me about, a lot of his friends in the business. A lot of them are no longer with us, but Hacksaw is still going, and we're excited to see him next in a few days at River City Wrestling Con. But we sat down with him to talk a lot about it. A little later on, I'm going to bring in a wrestling expert to help analyze Hacksaw Jim Duggan's legacy. But first, we want to sit down with old Hacksaw. Listen to this. He's just a fun interview. Here's our interview with Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Well, we are so excited to be joined now by legendary wrestler Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who will be at the River City Wrestling Con June 10th and 11th in just a few days. Hacksaw, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, my pleasure, Scott. But, the first thing Hacksaw Jim Duggan has to do is give a big, oh, kind of fires me up nowadays, gets me going, gets the blood flowing.
Well, Hacksaw, I want to say I actually interviewed you. You probably don't remember this. This was about 7 years ago in Jacksonville. You came to a Jaguars Minnesota Vikings game with Flair and the Nasty Boys. And the thing I remembered about that was you did, when we talked to you for our quick soundbite for the news, you said, ho, and there was no one there, but still I heard like 50 people yell, ho. How have you remained so over and well-known for all these years?
I know. It's amazing the popularity of professional wrestling around the world. I do a lot of charity events with the NFL, and I always ask them, like, world champions, where in the world do you fellas go? They're like, well, we went to London. I'm like, that's like going to the West Coast. I said, Nobody knows Tom Brady down in Christchurch, New Zealand, but they'll go, oh.
You'll get that anywhere. So you've been all over. Talk to me about some of the places you've been.
Yeah, I've wrestled every state in the Union, every province in Canada, in 30 different countries. It's crazy, the appeal. I just came back from a Comic-Con over in Aberdeen, Scotland last month.
Wow. So I want to go over a lot of this with you. But I want to ask you about why you've been in the news lately. About 4 or 5 months ago, you were in every newspaper in America. You're on Tucker Carlson. Talk to me about what happened with the intruder at your house.
Well, actually, it was a very terrifying ordeal. It really was. It was right before Christmas time. Now, to set the stage, we live out in the country. You may hear a rooster in a little while, but we live out in the country. We got 10 acres. It's all fenced in. It's a dirt road. Nobody near us. It's pitch black. Our house is the only house with Christmas lights, even though we're on a dirt road. I'm sitting watching TV, and my wife's packing. We're going on the road the next day. And all of a sudden, there's this pounding coming down. I can hear it coming down my front porch. So I jump up, come from one way. My wife comes the other. And as we come into the foyer, a 25-year-old man comes in we've never seen before in our lives. He trips over the front step. He falls into the house.
Oh, wow.
And he gets up on his knees as I come around the corner. And I tell you, Scott, I thought I was sure it was a home invasion because everybody knows where I live. People come by and take pictures. You see all this stuff in the news. I said, they're coming to get us. So boom, when the guy was on his knees, I got him by the throat and just kept going and went right back out onto the front porch with him. Boom, I throw him out on the front porch and he's screaming. And I said, Deborah, I watch him. So she steps on him. I reach back in. Of course, I'm the right age for watching Dirty Harry back in the day. So I bought the Model 29 Smith & Wesson 44 Magnum, and I have it here by the front door because it's so loud. It scares off the coyotes and foxes from my chickens. I never shoot them. It's just boom, boom. But I grabbed that 44, Scott. My first move, I'm looking at the back door. 1001, 1002. I sure somebody was coming in the back door. Nobody coming in the back door. I come back to the guy at the front porch. I pushed Deborah. He's screaming, "Help me, help me." And Deborah thinks he's screaming, "Help me," for me attacking him. But I'm holding him down now. He goes, "Help me. They're trying to kill me."
Wow. So
You
tell
put
me
right
about
there.
after this happens, you have a flurry of media, including you go on Tucker Carlson. How did that come about?
Oh, it's just MSM, Newsmax, all the conservative channels really picked it up.
Gotcha.
Newsmax, so One America News, and of course Tucker. I did the one show with him remotely, and we got along so well. I went to his studio, spent the day with him at the studio, and we visited for quite a while, man. Yeah, he said that he kind of appreciated it. He goes, "That it's a long trip from that small mill town in upstate New York," and I said, "It sure was."
Well, one of my favorite parts of that interview, at the very end, Tucker's trying to, move on like they do on the news. And you're like, "Let's stop, Tucker." You give him a ho and a USA, and he seemed caught off guard.
Yeah, I tell you, it's been great. It's been my honor to carry our flag all over the world. And of course, I joke with Ric Flair. Rick always goes, "Woo!" And I'm like, "Rick, are your trunks too tight or what?" It's more like a ho.
Well, let's talk about that. When I saw you with Ric Flair, have you remained close with Rick at all? Any stories about Rick?
Well, it's a tight group. A lot of folks don't realize how competitive professional wrestling is. People are saying, "Well, I want to be a wrestler." I said, "Well, chase your dreams, because you never know." But if you look at it as a businessman, if you want to make a living and just raise a family and be 40 years in the business, look at it as a businessman. There's 1,200 NFL football players. There's 500 NBA basketball players. There's 100 WWE wrestlers. It's television. It's more competitive than sports. And it's just not kids from America. You got kids from Japan, Australia, Europe. Everybody wants one of those 100 spots. It's an extremely competitive, but sure, it's sports entertainment. But that has nothing to do with it being competitive. And people go, "Oh, you guys are all good friends." I said, "Yeah, we all compete for the same money. We're real good friends."
So speaking of people that probably are not good friends, at least in kayfabe, if you ran into the Iron Sheik in an airport, are you going to throw down again?
No. Shit, at this time, brother, I'll be 70 soon. I'm lucky I don't pull a hamstring getting off the couch. Are you kidding? But I joke because Flair and Hogan call me kid. And
They
Jake
do.
Jake the Snake says he's younger, but I want to see a birth certificate.
Yeah, we talked to Jake a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, and
Yeah,
he
he
told
just
me
had
he's
his
one of the ones you
birthday.
keep in touch with.
Yeah, Jake was in my wedding back in the day. Oh, I've been with my wife for 40 years. And Jake, he probably would have been my best man, but my dad was my best man. And so Jake was an usher. And we've been friends. We've had our ins and outs over the 40 years, that's for sure. But we nowadays is great. Especially we just had WrestleMania out in Los Angeles in April. So DiBiase was out there. Jake was out there. It was good to see everybody.
So you say you've been married 40 years. You've kept a pretty strong life. I think your dad was a police chief. Is that right? I think I've heard that story.
My pop was the police chief up in upstate New York, town called Glens Falls, New York. I joke around everywhere else. I'm Hacksaw Duggan, and Glens Falls, I'm Chief Duggan's kid.
Well, how did you get into wrestling?
Well, I was a football player. Was my main sport. And my senior year in high school, I won the New York State Wrestling High School Championship in unlimited heavyweight, undefeated my senior year. My shot put record still stands today. This year, it's 50 years this year. My shot put record is standing in my high school.
Really?
Yeah, and I just did an interview with my folks up there in Glens Falls. And football was my main sport. So I was recruited by Ohio State, Penn State, Woody Hayes, Joe Paterno, but I ended up playing my college ball for SMU in Dallas, Texas. And I was down there, and Fritz Von Erich came up to me and said, "Kid, you might be a wrestler." And I blew him off. I wasn't a wrestling fan. I never watched it. I said, "I've been in the NFL for 10 years. Thanks a lot, but no thanks." So I went to the Falcons in 77, had 2 knee surgeries, went up to Canada in 78, played with the Argonauts, realized I had no long-term, as an offensive guard, no long-term future as wrestling. I called Fritz, and he gave me the gift of professional wrestling, because back then, If you weren't somebody's kid, you didn't get into wrestling. Jake, is in second generation. DiBiase, second generation. Kurt Hennig, second generation. I'm a total outsider. I didn't know nothing about wrestling, and Fritz gave me that gift. And what a gift. It's been a great business for me. Everybody hears the horror stories about wrestling, the dark side of the ring, and Jake has all his tribulations. For me, I've been with my wife for 40 years. I never had to go to rehab for booze or drugs. Did a lot of both. Can't deny that, but I never got hooked. Joe has no felony arrest, a couple misdemeanors, but it was back in the 80s,
Yeah.
I put two daughters through school. I do a ton of charity work. It's been a great business for me. And here at almost 70 years old, I still travel the world talking about the golden age of wrestling. Hogan, Macho Man, Jake the Snake, Andre the Giant.
So you're in Mid-South before the golden age, kind of. You're down there with Bill Watts people, I think, like JYD, Magnum TA, people like that. What was that like?
Well, Dr. Death, Steve Williams. It was a great time. It was a bunch of young guys, and you really learned your business because you'd wrestle 9 times a week. You do double shots on Saturday, double shots on Sunday. Bill Watts would watch your interview. If you didn't like it, you'd do it again. And you wouldn't do one generic interview. You do an interview for every individual city. So you really learned your trade. That's why a huge percentage of Hall of Fame guys came out of Mid-South. So they really learned how to work down there. Every night there was a party. You were young guys, New Orleans, Houston, Little Rock, and everybody stayed at the same hotel. So all the fans, all the girls knew where we stayed. I mean, it was a fun time in the business. Back then, a lot more guys were making a living in wrestling because there's all these territories. Now there's a lot more wrestlers, but very few guys actually make a living in wrestling.
How did you eventually get the gimmick, the 2x4, the ho, the USA? That all come at once or gradually over time?
No, I started off as Big Jim Duggan with short hair and clean shaven, and that didn't work. So I wore a mask and with C's on it for the convict, and that didn't work. I wore fur with chains on it, and I was Wild Man Duggan, and that didn't work. So I evolved into Hacksaw. So out of 40 years, probably 35 of them I've been Hacksaw. And,
now, you were the All-American by far for many years. There were a few others. Did you ever have overlap with Sergeant Slaughter, or was that an issue at all? Or did that work to your advantage, or what was that like?
No, Sarge and I have a great relationship. Matter of fact, the first thing I ever did was for the WWF for Vince McMahon Sr. as Big Jim Duggan with my long gold bathroom, clean shaven and short hair, was trying to get out of the Cobra Clutch. I mean, that was a huge spot for a young guy. He just got into wrestling. I fought like hell, and Sarge put me down. So I've known Sarge. We've been friends for years. Yeah. No, I don't think. And a lot of guys like Lex, they try to put that gimmick on them. They try to put that gimmick on guys. Hacksaw Jim Duggan. That's not a gimmick. That's who I am. What you see is what you get.
Did that make it a little easier for you as the years went by? You didn't have to act or be someone you weren't?
Yeah, that's, and that's why when I did go back and I had a young guy at WWE come up to me and hand me, he goes, Mr. Duggan, here's your verbiage for your interview. And then my verbiage from my house, some punk kid going to tell Hacksaw Jim Duggan how to cut his interview. And they're like, well, this is what we want you to say. And I'm like, well, send me my check.
Yeah.
So, but I have a whole new respect for that. It's very hard to do. Act, you say something to me, I was very robotic. I lost Hacksaw. So
now tell me about when you got to WWF. What were some of your favorite feuds when you got in there and were really pushed hard?
Yeah, I had a great run up there. Of course, people say, Hacksaw, you were never world champion, you were never intercontinental champion. You were
first Royal Rumble winner.
You were never tag team champion. I said, yeah. But that's great. We're all not lead singers in the band.
Yeah.
Hogan singing, lead singing. I'm back there playing the drums for 40 years. It's been a great spot. I mean, I beat everybody, but the guys who beat me would go to Holster. So, I never worried about being the champion or anything like that. No.
But you won that first Royal Rumble.
I won the first Royal Rumble, but the bigger thing for me, a lot of folks, and that's obviously the biggest feather in my cap in professional wrestling is to win the Royal Rumble. You can imagine as a kid and living in upstate New York, 200 miles from New York City, my dad would bring us down to Madison Square Garden to the circus. So, we can imagine, have my dad with me in the car, who was my best man at my wedding, and drive up and pull in front of Madison Square Garden and see Hacksaw Duggan versus Andre the Giant. I mean, a double deal to be main event at Madison Square Garden, but to be in there with Andre the Giant, and no matter what profession you're in, you sell out the garden, And we had
what was it like to work with Andre?
Scary sometimes. But I had a good relationship with Andre. I knew Andre. I met him as a kid when I was working as the convict with the mask over in Hawaii for High Chief Peter Maivia, a real young guy back in like 1980. And I met him because all the top guys would go to Japan. And on the way back, they'd stop in Hawaii, do a show for High Chief. And I got to wrestle Andre as a kid. So he remembered way down the road. So, you can imagine. We're doing, I think it was Saturday Night Main Event, the most popular show on television. Andre the Giant storms to the middle of the ring, goes, "I challenge anyone." And they're like, "Hacksaw, get your 2x4." So I got my 2x4.
You went to WCW eventually. What was your life like there when you went in, and kind of after Hogan, I think?
I went in with Hulkster. I get along with Hulkster. I think when he did his first interview, it was me, Jimmy Hart, and the big man. When we first went down to WCW. So I enjoyed the early years at WCW till Vince Russo came in. But yeah, it was great. And of course, it was an easy territory. That's when contracts started. We didn't have contracts up until the WCW started them, and that made contracts. Up to then, you got paid. You work, you got paid. You didn't work, you got hurt. Tough break.
You said when Vince Russo came in, did that change things?
Yeah, sure did. But ended up being part of. I was maybe the janitor of WCW, and I found the TV title belt in the trash. And Jimmy Hart was producing the Saturday afternoon shows, and I was wrestling the Cuban Assassin with a TV title. And we were doing better numbers than Thursday Thunder with 5 times less the budget. They had a huge budget. We had our little Saturday afternoon show. So that gimmick worked pretty good. So they brought me in, and then they turned me Team Canada, which was different. They turned me heel. Probably the only time I was a heel in my career.
Was that difficult to be heel? I mean, you had been such an over baby face for so many years.
Well, it was kind of fun. It was on the road, and I cut my hair and shaved my beard, put on a suit, and went in the dressing room. Nobody had a clue who the hell I was. I'm sitting in there, just listening, taking it all in, and trying to figure out who I was.
Now, you were with Lance Storm and stuff during that run, is that right?
It was Lance Storm, Major Guns, Bill DeMont was called something. I'm not sure what he was, but yeah. But then you can just imagine Vince Russo took WCW, Ted Turner's company with Turner Channel and Turner Network, and the total power of Turner organization. You go to Atlanta, you go to the Turner Tower, and he flushed it all down the toilet. How do you lose to Vince McMahon, even though Vince is a great, great guy? But with that machine that Vince Russo had, and for Vince to win the Monday Night Wars, it just shows what a master Vince McMahon was and what a total disaster Vince Russo was.
What about when NWO started? Now, you had been, winning titles and stuff, I think, pre-NWO. Then NWO comes in and everything changes. What was that like for you in the middle of that?
Well, I think that was the company was kind of going in that direction, where I'm kind of corny hacksaw, nothing fancy Dan, but Hacksaw Jim Duggan, just a 2x4 and the flag of the United States of America. Oh, and, now they were going with the finger kisses and all. That's not me. I just don't fit into that role. So I think that was the direction that they were going in.
You eventually went on to Legends House. How long did you do that for?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think it was around 4 or 5 weeks. It was great, man. They were expecting a drama They end up with a comedy, man.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I was flying
Anyone
out to
you
California. Yeah, I
go
was
ahead.
flying out to California. They put us in a mansion in Palm Springs, and we're flying out to Palm Springs, and they're like, "Well, Doug, you have to have a roommate." I'm like, "No, I don't need a roommate. I don't want a roommate. I got to have a roommate." I'm like, "Well, Jimmy Hart. I know Jimmy pretty good. I can room with Jimmy." And they're like, "No, you're rooming with Piper." I didn't really know. We knew each other, but not well. So Piper, the first 2 or 3 days were just like, "Yeah, how you doing, brother? Good. How about you?" But then we had it off, and it was like summer camp. We had more fun than anything, man. And that's just I could get away with anything. I'd blame it on Piper.
Now, I think I've seen right here. Were you ever close with Bret Hart?
I get along good with Brett. I would say we're good friends, but Brett stayed at my house many times, and I've stayed at his house here, so we're good friends. Yeah.
Good relationship there. And did you have the overlap with Haku on the King gimmick?
No, I met Haku as a convict in 1980 in Hawaii. We were making $40 a week. I've known Haku longer than I know anybody in the business. He's a very good friend. Yeah. That the Kingdom made no. Yeah, it was just business. Yeah.
Is he as tough as they say?
He's as tough as they say.
Yeah.
And he's a jerk magnet. If he walks into a bar, every jerk in the place will mess with him. And he's an easy guy. But it's good to see him doing so well down in Florida. He's doing really good.
And how's your health doing? So I've been kind of tracking it over the years. It looks like you're doing considerably better. Is that right?
Yeah, I've had more than my share, because back when I was with WCW, I had kidney cancer, and that was very terrifying. I actually went out into the ring and told the folks about it.
Yeah.
But early detection saved my life. They removed the kidney. I didn't have to go through chemo or radiation or anything. And then boom, later, after I retired, pretty much I had a heart problem. That's why I dropped so much weight. My doc's like, "Jim, you don't see a lot of old heavy guys." I'm like, "I got your point, doc." Yeah, so I'm supposed to be about 225 now, which is later. I was 250 in high school, so I'm down to 225. And then just recently, again, just this past year, my wife was, "Yeah, time for your physical." I'm like, "I don't need a physical." She goes, "It's already, we got it." She takes me down there. My PSA level was high. One thing led to another. The doctor, a friend, looks me in the eye, something people will remember their whole life. "Mr. Duggan, you have the most aggressive type of prostate cancer you can have." Me and the wife hug each other, start crying. So we live close to Columbia in South Carolina. We have to go down to Charleston, about 3 hours away, for the surgery. I did the surgery, waited about 2 more months. They tested me after the surgery. They're like, "Sorry, Mr. Duggan, it's still there."
Yeah.
Extremely, I was depressed. I did a big post on internet about how depressed I was. But I went in, I saw the folks going through chemo. I said, "I got nothing to feel bad about."
Yeah.
I did the 8 weeks of radiation and got to ring the bell and feeling great.
Well, that's great to know. I want to ask you about some of your other big feuds. Did you feud with Honky Tonk Man at all ever?
Not too much with Honky. DiBiase.
Oh, you feuded with DiBiase. Tell me about Ted.
I worked with Ted a lot. I wrestled Ted. Any of the second generation guys, Ted, Jake, Kurt Hennig, those guys are just that much more polished. They grew up in the wrestling world. Ted was in the ring at 15. I started at 25, So wrestling with a guy like Ted DiBiase, I learned an awful lot, man. And I wrestled Ted probably, thousands of times all around the world. He's, and of course, Ted's, people say, "Well, Hacksaw, what was your favorite move?" I said, "I kick and punch." I'm a brawler. I'm not a wrestler, but I learned a lot about the business. And of course, you're asking about the 2x4 earlier. I got to tell you.
Yes. Oh, you've got it there. Yeah. Tell me about it. How did that start?
Well, back in when I was working in the San Antonio territory, when I first became Hacksaw, that was before it was sports entertainment. If you were a heel, the people, they really hated your guts. They spit at you and punch you when you're going to the ring. And you wouldn't, after the match, you'd all walk together out to your car. You wouldn't walk out by yourself. They'd be out there. People really hate. So just getting back and forth to the ring was horrible. So I'm in like Lubbock, Texas, back there sitting in this old nasty dressing room all covered with loogies and bruises, rethinking my career choice,
Yeah.
And Bruiser Brody comes in and he goes, Duggan, he says, if you carry something to the ring, carry something you can use. Forget those feathered boas and sequin robes. And just by the luck of the draw, I looked down, I'm like, well, here's a piece of wood. And I came out yelling, waving that 2x4. It was like parting the Red Sea. Them people scattered. I got to the ring. I'm like, this is great.
Yeah.
But I joke. I said, one time I got a big splinter in my thumb. Scotty, I got a real big splinter. And I went, oh. No.
That's no fun. I got to ask you, because fans have brought it up to me, just a fantasy match. If your life had been different and you were in NWA, WCW earlier instead of WWF, instead of Nikolai Volkov and Iron Sheik, how would have a Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Nikita Koloff feud gone, do you think?
I think great, because, back then, it's not rocket science. People want to cheer USA, especially then. People are proud of their country. People love their country. It was my honor. Can you imagine standing in the middle of this Silver Dome with 93,000 people holding our flag and having everybody in the building going, USA, USA. People loved it. I mean, so yeah, put me against the Russian. It's not rocket science. And a guy like Nikita with a great talent, yeah, we'd have great matches. We'd have the building going. It's more than ring work. Me and the Whackers, the Bushwhackers, opened up Wembley Stadium with the Nasty Boys and the Mountie. And of course, we're opening up the big show, 80,000, 90,000 people over in London in Wembley Stadium. And everybody says, well, you got to really kick off the show. Really kick off the show. You want a good match, kick off the show. So anyway, we get out there, the place is rocking. Luke would go to one corner and go, yo! Butch would go to the other corner and go, yay! I'd go to the other corner and go, oh! We did 10 minutes without touching. That whole place was just, oh, yeah! Oh.
I was always surprised how well the Bushwhackers were received. I remember WWF sent them to the White House Easter egg roll as the brand ambassadors for the president. The Bushwhackers were really over.
Yeah, everybody, that was the golden age. I mean, try to think of a football player or a basketball player from the 80s. I mean, maybe one or two. Hogan, Macho, Warrior, Jake the Snake, Junkyard Dog, Andre the Giant. It's the golden age. It was like Gary Cooper, Jimmy Stewart. It's just a moment in time. I mean, even Coco Beware, just up and down the card. Bret Hart. And I was just glad to be part of it.
You mentioned Nasty Boys. Any good Nasty Boy stories?
I don't know if I can tell them on your show, brother. No, I love the Nasties. They're good friends of mine, especially Brian Knobs. I get along good with Brian.
And Brian's doing okay. I saw he had some health scares of his own.
He's got some. Well, nowadays, I mean, in the old days, we all get together talking about the girls and the bars and where to go. Now it's about the doctors and the surgeries and which hospitals we're at. But that's the good deal. There's a lot of guys that are gone that wish they could bitch. I mean, a lot of wrestlers are dead. High death rate, high drug and alcoholism rate, high divorce rate. Tough business. I would not recommend wrestling to anybody.
What? So you're going to be in town. Are you coming to Jacksonville for River City Wrestling Con?
Yes. Yeah. Jacksonville. Looking forward to it, man. Of course, I go through Jacksonville all the time. My daughters are down in Davenport by Orlando. Okay. But I tell you, years ago, they asked me to do a Comic-Con, and I was like, geez, I don't know, a Comic-Con. I'm like, it's a Comic-Con. Are you kidding? They're more fun than anything. And there's something for everybody. I mean, TV stars, anime people, golden age wrestling, and you see kids there. Some of them are in movie quality costumes, and then another kid with a box on his head. But everybody's having fun. I joke. I said, you're at the New York City Comic-Con. It's jam-packed, and somebody will bump into you and go, excuse me. I mean, cons are a lot of fun. I really enjoy them.
Did you ever overlap with Jerry Lawler very much, or you guys didn't cross paths much?
Oh, yeah. Jerry and I know each other, not real well. But like I said, it's a small group of guys. So, yeah, I know Jerry.
Jerry. What about?
I never worked in that territory, and I never ran with Jerry. My best friends are all gone. God bless them.
Really?
Terry Gordy of the Fabulous Freebirds, Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and of course Piper. Yeah, those three were my three best friends. And Jake, I get along with Jake.
Get along with Jake.
I check on him every hour.
Want to ask you? You mentioned Bill DeMott. You were there, kind of at his peak. What was he like as a performer? Because he had a lot of talent.
Yeah, he had a lot of talent. Of course, that's the cream of the crop, brother. I mean, when you get there, it's hard to get one of those spots, and there's not many guys up there that can't carry their water. If you're working for WCW, WWF, you're one of the best in the world at your business. So you better know your stuff, or you're gone. I mean, they don't keep you around because they like you. If your numbers dress.
Did you do any? Were you in the Hall of Fame? What year was that?
2011.
2011. Who was in your class? I don't remember that one.
Shawn Michaels. Yeah, it was a good class. Shawn Michaels, the Road Warriors. Sonny was the chick. Drew Carey was the guy, the celebrity.
Okay.
Bob Armstrong, and Abby. You have the Butcher.
And Abdullah the Butcher is going to be here too. So what are your thoughts on the fact that you're still in the news after 40 years? Like, as you said, with like NBA, Michael Jordan's still around, but we take around 3 or 4 guys, no one gets paid attention to at all. But wrestlers, you just live forever, it seems like.
Around the world, too. I mean, around the world. We go to Australia, and we do Comic-Cons Australia, Japan. Like I said, I was just in Scotland, going back to England in October. It's amazing the appeal of wrestling. A lot of closet wrestling fans, and people go, I'm not a wrestling fan, but aren't you Hacksaw Duggan? You're kind of
hard to miss, and you've kept the beard, which was probably smart. They live the gimmick.
Yeah, well, I'm much smaller than I was, Of course, and it's all relative. You got to know where you're on the pecking order. I'd be getting off the plane. People are like, it's Hacksaw Duggan. Hogan will be behind me like, get out of the way, Hacksaw's Hulk Hogan. So you got to know where you're on the pecking order.
Yeah. Well, Hacksaw, this has been an absolute pleasure. We were definitely going to look for you at WrestlingCon in Jacksonville. Hope to talk to you again.
I look forward to seeing you in Jacksonville, Scotty, but you know what we got to do before we leave, buddy?
I'm ready.
And if you're going to hold, brother, hold like you mean it. Here we go.
I will.
Hey! That's some good hoeing.
I got nothing on you. Thanks again, Hacksaw.
Thank you, Scott.
So it was really exciting to sit down with the Hacksaw. He still keeps in touch with different guys like D.B. Aussie, Sergeant Slaughter, Jake Roberts. And it was interesting to me that he said Hogan and Flair call him Kid. That's kind of funny. And he's a good example of someone, as he said, who kept a really one-dimensional, very basic gimmick. Where he didn't really change much. He just does the 2x4, the ho, the USA, and it's worked for him. A lot of guys will have to change gimmicks, and he did early in his career, as he said. I didn't realize how many gimmicks he went through before he finally just found himself and just essentially turned the character into himself. That's essentially what you see. Hacksaw Jim Duggan is what you see on TV, is what you see in real life. And I'll say, before the interview, when we're recording that, and after the interview, just kind of the cross chat with us, he was exactly what you see on TV. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was really cool because maybe not every wrestler is exactly the same guy you think they would be in real life, but Hacksaw was exactly like you think he is. And as I said, I interviewed him back in 2016 at a Jacksonville Jaguars game, and he was immediately in gimmick. And when he did the ho, everyone started responding. And even though there weren't many people in the crowd, he was incredibly over, and he has a very memorable, simple gimmick that has worked for him for all these decades. So I sat down with a guy I'm going to bring on the show a few times here and there, a guy I've known 25 years. He, like me, is not in wrestling. He's a TV news anchor out on the West Coast. Joe V is what we'll call him, and he's got a hard-to-pronounce last name. But Joe V is going to join us here and there to analyze the legacy of some of these wrestlers. He's the one fan I know who's not really in the business. He did some work with Rowdy Roddy Piper, but he knows wrestling as well as any fan I've ever met in my life. So I sat down and I said, help me analyze Jim Duggan. So here's my interview with Joe V to talk about the legacy of Hacksaw Jim Duggan. So as we talk about Jim Duggan, I brought in a contributor, Joe V., who is an anchor at KPTV in Portland, Oregon, and an expert on all things wrestling. Joe, talk to me about Jim Duggan.
Well, first of all, I don't know that I'd say I'm an authority, but I did write a book, Grappler, Memoirs of a Masked Madman, and it's about Len Denton, and he's kind of an unsung hero of the territory days, and he was very big in Mid-South Wrestling, which was owned by Bill Watts, famously, and that was a tough guy territory, and that's where Jim Duggan made his mark, and I've heard firsthand from Lenny, also from Roddy Piper, who I worked with quite a bit through the years. The Jim Duggan was a guy, when he came into the business, you didn't mess with Jim Duggan. I mean, this guy could mess you up. Legitimate tough guy. And that's kind of what was his bread and butter for years and years and years. And then he got into WWE and he became kind of this lovable, patriotic teddy bear. And it's just really kind of interesting that he was just this kind of barroom brawler, tough guy, don't mess with him. And his WWE persona, I should say WWF persona, while certainly was a tough guy and all that, and he would actually say, tough guy, but he was much more of a lovable, almost comedic figure, obviously played up the patriotism. I think the biggest thing about Jim Duggan that makes him so unique is that guy stayed over for years. Like, as long as he said, "Ho!" Like, it didn't matter where he was, and people were going to lose their minds. There are very few people that for 20 plus years could always get a crowd to cheer them. Always a baby face. They tried to make him heel in WCW, and it just didn't work because people didn't buy it because people didn't want to boo the guy. He was that beloved for so many years.
What do you think he was like in WCW? So he was kind of getting a push in the mid-'90s when Hogan's there before NWO shows up. And he's winning titles. But then after NWO shows up, then it kind of changed. And he wasn't winning titles or anything like that. What do you think the NWO did to his character?
Well, I mean, let's face it. By the time he got to WCW, I mean, we'd seen that act for years and years and years. So it was kind of like, just like Hogan. I mean, eventually the fans kind of got sick of it, right? So when they brought him in initially into WCW, he was U.S. champion. He beat Steve Austin, if my memory serves me correctly, for the U.S. championship, and was kind of positioned in that just below Hogan position where he kind of was in WWE. But eventually WCW had to just kind of mix things up because fans had seen this before. They wanted something new. And so eventually they tried to, if you remember, they paired him up and they made him like anti-American, pro-Canadian with like Lance Storm. Which was weird. It didn't fit. It didn't work. He shaved his beard. It was like when they turned Austin heel. No one believed it. No one believed it. Nobody wanted to boo the guy. So yeah, I mean, they gave it a shot. You do these things to try to, prolong your career. But, at that point, the guy had been on top for close to 20 years or whatever it was. So it was kind of like him and guys in his generation, like Sergeant Slaughter, Iron Sheik, people like that. They just kept the same gimmick and it just stayed with them forever. Why do you think you don't see that as much anymore? You don't. That's true. I mean, I don't know. It was one of those things. Well, part of it was, of course, back then, those guys would still bounce around from territory to territory. So if you were in Mid-South or whatever and you did the gimmick, when you got to AWA, it's a new audience. And so they hadn't seen it before. And so you stay with it. I mean, but in fairness, all those guys did at some point try to recreate themselves. Of course, Sergeant Slaughter went heel and did the Saddam Hussein gimmick. And Iron Sheik joined him as Colonel Mustafa, which was an odd name. We all knew he was the Iron Sheik. So they do try to reinvent themselves. But, when you've been playing a character for 20 years, it's kind of hard to do that. So, and why is Jim Duggan still recognizable today as opposed to, say, a Lance Storm or a Mark Marrow or something like that? Why is Duggan still immediately recognizable? Hey, keep it simple. The guy, his gimmick was carrying around a piece of wood, saying ho, and waving the flag. I mean, it was just audience participation. The audience was invested. The audience bought in. They knew when Jim Duggan came out, they were going to yell ho. That was, and people loved it. It was simple, and it seemed legit. It didn't seem like an act. Whereas, I don't know.
We're going to get running, but Jovi, thanks again. We'll have you on another episode down the road.
You got it, tough guy.
And so that was a fun interview with Joe V. Thanks, Joe, for joining us. Of course, we will bring you back. We talked to you about a lot of the guys who we may be seeing at River City Wrestling Con, so we may bring back some of your analysis. We also want to talk to Joe in the future about all his dealings with Rowdy Roddy Piper, because he promoted a wrestling show with Rowdy Roddy Piper for about a year out in Oregon, where Piper's from, and we're going to talk to him a lot about Roddy Piper's legacy in an episode coming up down the road. But it was really exciting to sit down and talk to Jim, one of the most memorable characters of all time. We are going to sit down and hopefully catch up with him again at River City Wrestling Con. Once again, that is June 10th and 11th, just a few days from now. If you're watching this before then, come out and see us. We would love to hear from the fans, talk to you, hear what you have to say, spread the word about the podcast. You can find me at Going Ringside on Instagram and TikTok, are places I'm putting out exclusive content almost every day now about stuff going on in the wrestling world that you're not going to hear here on the podcast. We just interviewed an issue with Lacey Evans and Sergeant Slaughter's daughter. We talked about Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, running for president using Hulk Hogan's theme music. Just a lot of stuff out there. If you go follow at Going Ringside at both Instagram and TikTok, we are putting daily videos out there almost every day. We hope you'll give us a like and a follow there, and check out some of the content we're putting on down there. It's between shows. It's a good place to catch up with us. So thanks again for joining us for another episode of Going Ringside. We'll see you next Wednesday.
This has been Going Ringside with The Local Station, brought to you every Wednesday on your favorite podcast player, on New Sport Jacks Plus, as well as the New Sport Jacks YouTube channel.